So, get a load of this. An expert with 19 years' experience walked into a pre-owned dealer in London last year, picked up a Submariner, turned it over twice, set it down, and said, "That's real." But it wasn't. He'd been doing this for 19 years, and the watch had fooled him. That's where we are. The details on these Rolexes would fool you. Let me tell you about all of it. The era that ended. There's a specific type of counterfeit Rolex that doesn't exist anymore. You know the one. The Canal Street Special. Hollow bracelet links that rattled when you shook your wrist. A seconds hand that ticked loud and jerky instead of sweeping. A green hologram sticker glued to the caseback that started peeling by Tuesday. A date window that magnified nothing. The kind of fake you could identify in the dark, by sound alone, in under 3 seconds. That watch is gone. And what replaced it is deeply unsettling. Today's counterfeits come out of factories running multi-axis CNC machining, 3D laser scanning, and metallurgical analysis of authentic Rolex steel. The people making them aren't guessing anymore. They're engineering with intent. Some of these operations have engineers on staff whose only job is to pull apart actual Rolex movements, measure every tolerance, and reverse engineer each component. Not to make something that looks close, to make something that is close, dimensionally, mechanically, materially. In fiscal year 2025, U.S. Customs and Border Protection seized nearly 79 million counterfeit items, carrying a combined estimated retail value of over $7.3 billion if sold as legitimate goods. Watches were among the top categories. One shipment intercepted in Louisville was 160 counterfeit Rolex Datejust watches heading to a residence in Houston, carrying an estimated manufacturer's retail value of $2.57 million, all going to one address. The ones that weren't intercepted are on wrists right now. Some of them are being worn by people who know exactly what they are. Some are being worn by people who have no idea. A 2023 study by Watchfinder estimated 23.3 million counterfeit watches circulating the US market alone. Of all the luxury watches they received that year flagged as fake or containing fake parts, at least half were Rolex. Not because Rolex is uniquely vulnerable, because it's uniquely desired. The Submariner, the Datejust, the GMT Master. These are watches people save up for. They're watches that carry meaning. And meaning attracts fraud at a scale that Casio never will. 5 years ago, about 80% of all fakes sent into Watchfinder's service centers were identifiable at first glance, obvious by weight, by movement quality, by the visual tells that any experienced buyer learned to catch on sight. Today, those numbers have flipped. About 80% now require close, deliberate inspection. The obvious fake is the minority. Think about what that inversion means. The whole system of collector knowledge, the tips posted on WatchUSeek, the YouTube authentication videos, the advice about checking the sweep and the printing and the bracelet taper, all of it was built around the 80% that showed themselves easily. That knowledge base, mostly useless now against the top tier. The tells people memorized stopped being reliable at roughly the same time the fakes stopped making them. And there's something worth saying about how that knowledge spread. Watch forums, YouTube authentication guides, the collector subreddits, all of them documenting the tells in real time, posting photos, and building shared literacy. What nobody talked about was that the factories were reading those same forums. The Replica Watch Info community, RWI, cataloged every tell that authentication experts published. A tell discussed publicly in 2019 was a problem being engineered away by 2021. The transparency that was supposed to protect buyers became the research department for the people making fakes. But none of that is the story. The story is what the fakes can do now. The old tells are dying, and the new ones take a microscope to find. Trap 1. The case you can't argue with. Start with what you can see. It used to be enough. Authentic Rolex Submariners are made from 904L stainless steel, an alloy used in aerospace and chemical processing that is significantly more corrosion-resistant than the 316L steel most watchmakers use. Rolex adopted it across their full line in 2003. It's harder to machine, harder to polish, more expensive to source. For years, Part of the gap between a counterfeit and a Rolex came down to that steel. The weight wasn't quite right. The surface color under natural light was slightly off. Scratch resistance revealed things. Experienced hands could feel the difference. The top factories found 904L, or close enough that the standard tests don't tell you anything reliable anymore. VS Factory, based in Dandong in northeastern China, sources steel that matches the weight and surface behavior of Rolex material closely enough that a quality control manager at a major pre-owned watch retailer told WWD magazine in 2025 that surface inspection alone had become nearly useless for identifying high-tier clones. You pick it up, it feels right. You turn it under the light, it shines right. You check the bracelet taper, it tapers right. The case proportions, the lug width, the crown tube placement, all engineered from actual measurements of the reference being copied. There's something disorienting about holding a fake that feels exactly like what you remember the real thing feeling like. Because your memory of what a Rolex feels like was formed by handling the actual watch. The clone has borrowed your reference point and turned it against you. The center links on a bracelet are where you can sometimes still catch them. Under a 10-power loop, the micro-polishing on a counterfeit bracelet link can show what jewelers call an orange peel texture, slightly uneven, as if the surface was buffed too aggressively or at the wrong angle. Authentic Rolex polished and brushed surfaces are clinical in their precision. The transition between a polished center link and a brushed outer link is sharp. Not almost sharp, sharp. On a top clone, that edge softens. Barely. Not enough to see without magnification and a reference point for comparison. So ask yourself, does the buyer spending $12,000 on a pre-owned Submariner through a resale platform own a loop? Do they have a side-by-side photo of a verified authentic bracelet pulled up on their phone while they're checking? Are they in the right light, at the right angle, taking the time? Most aren't. And the bracelet check, even done correctly, only tells you about the bracelet. The case can be right. The bracelet can be right. Everything visible to the naked eye can be right. And what's inside still isn't what you're paying for. The surface tells are almost gone, but the surface is only the beginning. Trap 2. The crystal that almost passes. The Cyclops lens sits at 3 o'clock on every date model Rolex, a convex bubble of sapphire crystal designed to magnify the date by exactly 2.5 times. Clean, no distortion. The date sits perfectly centered in the window. Clone Cyclops lenses have come a long way. The cheap versions from 10 years ago showed a fisheye effect. Everything around the date stretched, colors shifted at the edges, the magnification felt off. You caught it cold in 2 seconds. The current high-tier copies are close enough that you need to photograph the date under controlled lighting and compare it directly to a confirmed authentic to see the difference with any reliability. What remains is subtle. On an actual Rolex, the date appears to almost float. The magnification is so clean, the number seems to come forward out of the dial. On a top clone, it's good, but it sits flat. The number is on the dial rather than hovering above it. That distinction requires intentional comparison, not a casual glance at a meetup table. Then there's the laser-etched crown. At the 6 o'clock position on every authentic Rolex sapphire crystal post, 2002, there's a Rolex coronet etched into the glass at the molecular level. It's intentionally designed to be nearly invisible, a ghostly arrangement of dots at varying depths, visible only at a specific angle under specific light. Most people who own a Rolex have never noticed it on their own watch. It's that subtle. Rolex didn't make it obvious, because obvious security features get copied. Counterfeiters know about it, they replicate it, but the replication burns it in too hard. On a counterfeit crystal, the crown shows up as a solid shape, visible under direct light, sometimes to the naked eye without needing a particular angle at all. On an actual Rolex, you have to hunt for it. On a clone, it announces itself. The strange situation this creates is worth sitting with. The tell that protects you, the hard-to-see feature designed to be subtle, is identifiable because the fake made it too easy to see. The genuine one hides. The copy is obvious. That inversion is where the authentication window still lives. A phone camera, a bright lamp, and patience. That's it for this particular check. But most people buying pre-owned watches don't know the crown is there at all. They can't check a feature they've never heard of. Which country do you think sells the most counterfeit Rolex watches? Drop it in the comments. The crystal tricks still work, if you know what to look for. What comes next? Almost nobody knows. Trap 3. The movement that fooled the experts. This is the part that changed everything. For most of counterfeit watch history, the movement was the trapdoor. No matter how good the exterior looked, you opened the case back and it was over. A cheap Chinese motor, sometimes a Miyota clone, sometimes something worse. Rotor wobble you could feel through your fingertip. A beat rate so irregular a time grapher would produce lines resembling a cardiac arrhythmia. Erratic spikes where there should be flat consistency. Open the case back. Done in 10 seconds. The whole game. In 2023 and 2024, the industry started seeing something different. VS Factory produces what the collector community calls the VS3235, a clone of Rolex's Caliber 3235 that goes well beyond visual imitation. The actual Caliber 3235, introduced in 2015, runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour, delivers a 70-hour power reserve, and uses what Rolex calls a free-sprung balance with microstella adjustment. 4 tiny gold screws set into the rim of the balance wheel that allow rate adjustment without touching the hairspring. It's elegant engineering. The screws add or reduce effective mass at the rim, changing the oscillation frequency without a traditional regulator arm pressing against the spring. The result is a more stable rate over time and a more visually distinctive movement than anything competitors were producing at the same price point. The VS3235 clones the free-sprung microstella system, not decoratively. Functionally, the balance wheel carries the microstella weights. The bridge layout mirrors the reference. The rotor spins in the correct direction. The click spring sits where it's supposed to sit. A teardown analysis comparing the authentic 3235 and the VS3235 found that the clone achieves the full 70-hour power reserve through a custom-machined, thin-walled mainspring barrel, the same architectural solution Rolex uses, not a shortcut. This wasn't a factory saving money. This was a factory solving the engineering problem the same way the original engineers solved it. Independent testing found the VS3235 running at +2 seconds per day, with an amplitude of 295 degrees. The authentic Rolex Caliber 3235 is COSC certified at -4 to +6 seconds per day. The fake was inside that window. A watchmaker who opened a case back on a VS3235, powered Submariner for the first time and had never seen one before, could stare at that movement for a full minute and not be certain. That's not supposed to happen. And it's not only the VS3235 factories producing clone Daytona movements. Copies of Rolex's in-house Caliber 4130 chronograph are getting closer. The Daytona was always considered relatively safer from counterfeiting because a working chronograph complication is exceptionally difficult to replicate. Column wheels, vertical clutch coupling, proper pusher feel. That window is closing. I keep coming back to this particular development because the caseback check was the last reliable home test for a non-specialist buyer. Pop the back, look at the movement. If something looks wrong, walk away. If it looks right, you're probably fine. But it looks right and it is right are no longer the same thing. And the VS3235 isn't even the ceiling anymore. The collector community tracks these factories closely, and in the past 18 months, a second operation has been producing a variant called the ERF 3235, where, according to direct visual comparisons posted on enthusiast forums, the free-sprung balance plate geometry is arguably closer to the authentic 3235 than the VS version. Two factories, independently solving the same engineering problem, arriving at solutions that are both within authentication gray areas. That's not a cottage industry, that's competition, and competition drives quality up. Think about what the resale market looked like in 2019. The movement check was so reliable that experienced dealers would skip surface checks entirely and go straight to the case back. You didn't need to examine the dial. You didn't need to check the rehot. You popped the case back, looked for 10 seconds, and knew. The whole authentication process collapsed into a single 10-second check. That efficiency made the pre-owned market work. Fast, reliable, scalable. Every watch that came in could be assessed quickly, traded confidently. The 10-second check was the infrastructure. It's gone, and nobody has built a replacement that works at the same speed. There is still a tell in the movement, but it requires a time grapher, not a glance. Hook a clone to a time grapher and run it through multiple positions. Face up, crown down, dial down, crown left, crown right. Authentic Rolex movements hold their rate within a tight band across all 6 positions. Clone movements, even well-made ones, show amplitude, drop, and beat error variance when run through the full position sequence. The lubricants applied in the assembly process aren't the same grade or applied to the same standard. The amplitude drops more between positions. The beat error fluctuates. The lines on the time grapher waver where an authentic movement produces something almost meditative in its regularity. A watchmaker with a time grapher catches it. But that's not the test you're running at a handshake deal in a coffee shop. And the handshake deal is where most secondary market transactions still happen. Picture the buyer who did everything right. He found a Submariner through a trusted reseller platform. He checked the listing photos carefully. He read the description, noted the serial number, saw the warranty card photographed alongside it. He met the seller in a public place, turned the watch over, checked the crown on the crystal, looked at the sweep, ran his thumb along the bracelet. Everything passed. He paid for it, wore it for 8 months, brought it into an authorized dealer for a service inquiry. That's when the dealer set it on the counter and said, carefully, that there were questions about the movement. 8 months of wearing something that wasn't what he thought it was. Not because he was careless, because the test he didn't run was the one that would have caught it. The movement used to be the answer. Now it's just another question, and the next trap doesn't even involve the watch. Trap 4. The warranty card that lies. Rolex sells its watches with a green warranty card. It carries the watch's serial number, the purchase date, and the authorized dealer's details. It's the paper trail connecting the object to its origin. In the secondary market, those cards matter enormously. A Submariner with papers sells for significantly more than the same watch without documentation. Buyers treat the card as corroboration, as confirmation, as one more layer of certainty before wiring the money. It's not. Not anymore. Counterfeit warranty cards have been circulating for years. Watch Collecting Lifestyle documented the rise of fake Rolex papers as early as 2022, noting that watches typically sold without documentation were increasingly appearing with counterfeited warranty cards, allowing sellers to command prices they had no right to ask. But the current version of the problem goes further. In 2020, Rolex updated their warranty cards with embedded NFC chips, the same near-field communication technology used in contactless payment cards. The idea: tap the card with your phone, and it redirects to gcard.rolex.com, Rolex's warranty verification system, a digital layer of authentication sitting right in your wallet alongside the watch. Fake cards are now circulating with chips of their own. Some are non-functional. The phone detects nothing. Others redirect to an address that isn't gcard.rolex.com. The page may look convincing. The serial number displayed may match the watch sitting on the table. But the domain isn't registered to Rolex SA, and what the page shows you was put there by whoever made the card, not by Rolex. You did the smart thing. You checked the chip, you got a result. And all you confirmed is that someone built a convincing enough redirect to fool your phone. The genuine Rolex NFC connects to a Rolex-controlled system. The fake version doesn't. If you look at the full URL on your phone screen after tapping, it won't end in Rolex.com. Most buyers don't check the URL. They see something happen on their screen and feel reassured. There are physical tells too, and they work. A UV light held over the back of a legitimate 2020 onwards card reveals a chip-like security pattern. The serial and model numbers fluoresce under ultraviolet. Counterfeit cards don't respond to UV. The raised, embossed text on the serial and model numbers is another tell. Authentic cards from 2020 onwards have them printed in relief, not flat. You can feel the difference with a fingertip. These checks are reliable. Almost nobody thinks to run them before buying. What actually matters? No app, no tap, no card, confirms authenticity on its own. The only verification that means anything is the watch being presented to a Rolex authorized dealer or a certified authenticator with the tools to open it and inspect what's inside. Cards are paper. Chips can be cloned or non-functional. The watch is the thing. Everything else is decoration. The paperwork lied. The chip redirected nowhere real. And then there's the one trap that even experienced dealers missed. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Trap 5. The Frankenwatch. This is the most expensive mistake you can make, and the hardest to catch. A Frankenwatch is a hybrid. Clone foundation, authentic components on top. The counterfeiter sources a real Rolex dial, bought from a damaged watch, a parted-out parts lot, or a network of gray market suppliers trading in individual components, real hands. Sometimes a real bezel insert, occasionally a real clasp. Those authentic parts get mounted on a clone case over a clone movement. The result is a watch where the parts you're most likely to examine are real. The dial is authentic Rolex. The hands are authentic Rolex. The printing density is right because it was printed at Rolex's facility in Plan-les-Ouaces, Geneva. The font serifs are correct because they always were. A loop check passes because you're looking at a real dial. What you're not looking at is the movement, which is still a clone, and the case finish, which under microscopic examination in the right light will show polishing quality that doesn't meet the standard of what Rolex produces. And the bracelet clasp, one of the most commonly substituted components in a Frankenwatch, because authentic clasps are expensive to source and hard to obtain cleanly. Watchfinder's 2023 study identified Frankenwatches as a distinct and significant category within the problem in the US market. Watches that aren't wholly counterfeit but contain fake parts in places buyers never think to look. There's a version going the other direction that's arguably worse. A vintage Rolex, legitimately old, that has been repaired and restored over decades with non-authentic parts. The watch started as real. Components failed and were replaced with whatever was available at the time. Now it's neither fully authentic nor cleanly fake. The auction market has been burned by this pattern repeatedly. A vintage timepiece with significant provenance, where parts have been swapped through legitimate service over 40 years, creates an authentication problem that even specialists argue over. The watch started honest and arrived somewhere murkier, with nobody intending any deception. For a buyer in the secondary market, the Frankenwatch defeats the most accessible test: visual inspection of the dial and hands. You see the right thing because it is the right thing. The wrong things are hidden underneath, or in the components you weren't examining. There are ways to catch it. The caseback serial number, cross-referenced against Rolex's movement production records, tells you whether the caliber inside matches what should be in a watch with that reference number and production year. A service history at an authorized Rolex service center, which stamps the movement itself and creates a traceable record, is another layer. Both require time, expertise, and money spent on authentication before you spend money on the watch. What drives the Frankenwatch problem is that authentic Rolex components have a secondary market of their own, not counterfeit parts. Actual Rolex dials, authentic Rolex hands, removed from damaged watches, end-of-life service parts, or gray market supplier networks. A genuine Submariner dial pulled from a water-damaged case is worth real money to someone building a Frankenwatch. So is a genuine clasp, a genuine bezel insert, genuine hands. The people building Frankenwatches aren't buying fake dials. They're buying real ones from the parts market, which is legal, and assembling them onto clone cases, which is the fraud. That distinction matters because it means the authentic components you're examining have an unimpeachable provenance. They came from a real Rolex. The authentication checks that catch a complete fake, checking the printing quality, checking the font, checking the lume fill, pass cleanly. Because the dial being examined was made in plan Le Soits, the fraud is underneath it. Most people don't do this. Most people are trusting the surface. You made it through the case, the crystal, the movement, the paperwork, a watch built with authentic parts. What's left is the one test that doesn't fail. The two tests that hold. Everything above can fail under the right conditions. These two don't. 1. The timegrapher. A timegrapher is a device that listens to the acoustic output of a movement and translates it into a visual readout. Beat rate, beat error, and amplitude, measured sequentially across multiple positions. Rolex certifies their movements to cost chronometer standards at the factory, then pushes internal tolerances further still. The result is a movement that watchmakers describe as boring on a timegrapher, not a compliment in everyday conversation. In this context, it's the highest possible praise. The lines barely move. The beat error sits near zero and stays there. The amplitude holds from position to position with almost no variance. Clone movements show amplitude drop and beat error variance when run through the full 6-position sequence. Even the VS3235, which performs at chronometer grade on casual single-position testing. The lubricants used in the assembly room aren't the same grade. They're not applied to the same standard. The gear train tolerances are close. Close isn't identical, and the difference accumulates across positions. The lines on the timegrapher waver where an authentic movement produces something hypnotic in its steadiness. A trained watchmaker reading a timegrapher printout for a watch claimed to be a Rolex caliber 3235 knows exactly what boring and stable looks like. Anything that introduces drama into those lines is a reason to keep asking questions. But a timegrapher costs several $100s. Reading one correctly takes experience. And it's not a test you're running in a coffee shop before shaking hands. 2. The rehaut under magnification. The rehaut is the inner metal ring surrounding the dial, between the dial edge and the crystal. On every modern Rolex since 2003, it carries continuous laser engraving. Rolex, Rolex, Rolex cycling all the way around, with the serial number appearing once at 6 o'clock. On an authentic Rolex, every single letter of that engraving is cut to a consistent depth, every crown symbol. The walls of each cut are clean and vertical. The floors of the engravings are flat. It looks like something made with obsessive precision, because it is, an industrial standard that Rolex holds across every reference, every year, at scale. On a clone, the engraving depth varies. Some letters cut deeper, some shallower. The walls of the cuts aren't perfectly vertical. Under a 10-power loop or a USB microscope you can buy for $20, the inconsistency accumulates from character to character. Not on every letter. But once you start looking at the variation, once you compare it to a reference image of an authentic rehaut, the difference becomes visible and unmistakable. No factory producing at the volumes these counterfeit operations require has yet managed to apply rehaut engraving at the consistency Rolex achieves. The depth variance under magnification is the single most accessible test that reliably separates authentic from fake without requiring expensive equipment. You need a decent loop, a reference image of a confirmed authentic rehaut, and 20 minutes. That's it. Honestly, I'm not sure why this test hasn't traveled further in the collector community. It's been discussed in authentication circles for years, and yet the majority of buyers I've seen talk about checking a pre-owned Rolex never mention it. 2 tests. One needs a device, one needs a lens. Neither works if you don't know what you're comparing against before you buy. What this actually means. The pre-owned watch market runs on trust. The buyer trusts the seller, knows what they're selling. The seller trusts the person they bought from knew what they had. Somewhere in that chain, a superclone enters, and the trust passes intact, person to person, because nobody along the way looked hard enough at what was actually inside. Bezel's 2025 market report tracked authentication rejection rates across pre-owned luxury watch submissions through the year. In the first half of 2025, 27% of watches submitted for resale failed authentication checks. In the second half, as supply tightened and pricing pressure built, that number climbed to 38%. Nearly 2 in 5 watches submitted for resale in the back half of last year rejected. Not edge cases, not obvious fakes, watches that had been purchased, owned, and believed in. And these weren't sellers trying to offload counterfeits knowingly. Bezel's own report notes that the increase was driven by sellers who became more aggressive as supply tightened, submitting watches with undisclosed modifications or parts that didn't match the original configuration. Most of them believed they owned what they paid for. The deception had happened somewhere earlier in the chain. By the time it arrived at authentication, the person submitting it was just as surprised as anyone. That's the part that hits differently once you understand the engineering. It's not a story about fraud and victims in the traditional sense. It's a story about how convincing the counterfeits became while everyone was trusting the surface. The weight feels right. The sweep feels right. The card redirects somewhere that looks like a verification system. And in a factory in northeastern China, an engineer looked at a Rolex caliber 3235 under a microscope and built something that a 19-year veteran picked up, turned over twice, and set back down without catching. 40 seconds. The only authentication point that means anything is a Rolex authorized dealer or a certified service center with the equipment to open the watch and examine what's inside. Not an app, not a card, not your own careful eyes in good lighting, however careful those eyes are. The market got sophisticated. The fakes got more sophisticated faster. The gap between them isn't closed, but it's narrow enough now that the answer has changed. It used to be, learn the tells. Now it's, don't trust the object, trust the process. The person who learns the tells and stops there is exactly who these fakes were engineered for. There's a specific collector type who worries about this, and then there's a much larger group who doesn't know they should. The person who worries is usually someone deep enough in watch culture to have heard about superclones, read a forum thread or two, knows the vocabulary. They buy carefully, ask questions, use reputable dealers. The group that doesn't worry is the larger market. Someone buying a Submariner as a milestone purchase, someone upgrading from a gray market dealer they found through Instagram, someone picking up a Datejust with papers from a seller on a resale platform. That second group is buying in the dark. Not because they're reckless, because the problem wasn't visible to them. Watchfinder's research found that 54% of Americans who had been deceived by a fake said they would never buy pre-owned again. That response makes sense. But it also means the fraud doesn't just cost the individual buyer. It costs the whole secondary market, the buyers who would have participated and decided not to. Authentication isn't glamorous. A time grapher, a loop, an authorized dealer appointment. None of that is as satisfying as the moment you pick up the watch and it feels right in your hand. But right now, it feels right is a feeling that was engineered for you by people in Dandong. Protect the process instead. Which of these 5 traps surprised you most? Let me know in the comments. Like this video and subscribe.